And I will add one last thing that I've been an engineer. It's coming up on 40 years. I think in 2 more years I'll be doing this for 40 years. I'm living 2 of my passions. How ridiculous is that?
I'm your host, Brian McCann, and this is the Road to Wine Expert podcast. As I re-release this podcast, I'm often reminded of what an amateur I am. Case in point, last weekend, I'm in Vegas, and I don't back up my audio, and I'm going to recut this intro tonight, the day I'm supposed to release the podcast. So here we are, and I'll tell you someone who is not an amateur. That is today's guest, Ray Pfister. Ray Pfister has over 40 years experience as an audio engineer, and he's been podcasting for over 10. That's right, decade podcast experience. He was there early, before it was cool. And there's something about that wisdom, and that's what I remember most about this interview with Ray. And when I go back and I listen to it, I heard all of his little nuggets. You know, his advice is like that of an old friend, but not the cutesy kind that you find in a mug. It's that reality check, that slap in the face that he delivers. And it was really nice meeting him earlier this year at one of the largest wine events in the world. So if you're looking to combine your passions, like Ray, if you're looking to get into podcasting, I can't recommend this episode enough. So sit back and enjoy, and let's hear Ray's story.
Just like anybody else, you start with a low-end wine just because you're curious. When you're younger, you're drinking all kinds of stuff, and I think you're fishing your way around, what's appealing to you. I started with a brand, and this is when I was first married in the 80s, a brand called Canai, which was a cheap Italian wine. And they had these great commercials. They were sort of meant to be, selling with sex. Can I, that sort of thing. But all my friends, we drank it pretty regularly. Then you evolve into White Zin. And then I was also a waiter shortly after that. I'm like, oh, wow, there's some really good stuff out here. So you start trying them because you need to know what you're selling. And I liked selling wine because I usually made extra money doing it. And it was fun to sort of go through the whole show of uncorking or, for a sparkling wine pulling the cork out. So yeah, kind of a typical evolution.
Cool. So then that sort of marks your introduction into wine. And then walk me from maybe waiting tables to life between the vines. How did you get there?
Well, I've done a lot of different things in my life. Bartending and waiting tables were 2 of the things. I'm an audio engineer professionally. What I do is post-production, radio, TV commercials. We do work for national, local, regional clients, that kind of thing. So, and I love audio. I started as a music engineer. So, in fact, that's how I met my first wife. And we were both wine lovers. And as I've been doing this, I own my own business. It'll be 20 years this year. And I kind of thought about 10 years ago, would it be interesting to sit down and interview some of these folks? I listen to NPR pretty regularly, and I thought, wow, I could do that. I have a journalistic background. When I was in college, I studied journalism. So it was just a natural thing. Made my first trip out to Napa in 2001, and that was it for me. I was gone. I mean, just meeting the people we got to meet then. So I had a business partner at the time. He and I got together and we started the project. We did a little bit of fact finding out there, very intense fact finding. And, it just made sense to me. And eventually I bought him out of the project. But people were so welcoming. Of course, yes, I'm giving them publicity, but a lot of sincerity. And one thing I could say is I've never met a dull winemaker. So I hope that answers the question. That's pretty much the road, yes.
Yeah, that's a great answer. So it's sort of wild that you've been doing it for a long time. I think podcasting is now finally the it thing to do. You're probably doing it before a lot of the technology that's out there today to get your message out. So can you talk about starting it? Was it just like a fun project, a side project, and then, what it has evolved into today?
Well, when I started it, I was very serious about this idea of wanting to grow it, which is what I've done.
Mm-hmm.
We were a little more, the first few podcasts would be, we'd do 4 guests in a show rather than one. We'd do sort of 10-second teasers and then full-length interviews that they could have access to. They weren't really part of the main show. And after a while, I thought, no, these full-length interviews were more interesting. So it was just this idea of, the first few interviews you do, again, it's like discovering wine. You start discovering these winemakers and you're going, these are really fascinating people. And the typical cliche with wine is that the more you learn, the less you know. And that was what I was finding out. And even today, again, next year will be our 10th anniversary of doing Life Between the Vines. My mind gets exploded every time I talk to somebody, whether it's learning about what's happening in the vineyards, whether it be the bottling technique, whatever it might be. It's all pretty fascinating. And I've been lucky. Twice I've gotten to work in a winery for a week in the cellar during harvest. And that just opens your mind up so much to seeing how it's done.
Yeah, I think that hands-on experience sort of transforms you, whether it's even just going and tasting in the region, like going to Napa. That was one of those moments that was a tipping point for me too. When I finally went, I was like, okay, I'm in this full throttle.
I like how you said finally went. I felt the same way. I was a little disappointed in myself. I waited so long.
Yeah, I should have went sooner. I mean, that's probably my only regret is not traveling to wine specific regions earlier with the intent of like tasting and learning.
Sure. To your point though, for what it's worth, having started this almost 10 years ago, we got in at a very good time because we created relationships I never would have dreamed of. And I don't know if that's as easy to do today, but back then, the Napa Valley Vendors Association has been very welcoming us. We've been to 9 auction Napa Valley through the, I think, about 8 premier Napa Valleys. So we're very lucky in that regard. And, but I think you always have that, gee, I wished I'd done it before that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's natural. I think when you find something you're passionate about and that you like doing, like, man, I wish I could have found this earlier, but it's sort of that you probably weren't ready for it at the time. So it all works out.
You're right. And I will add one last thing that I've been an engineer. It's coming up on 40 years. I think in 2 more years, I'll be doing this for 40 years. I'm living 2 of my passions. How ridiculous is that?
You can't beat that. I think at the end of the day, right, if you're doing what you love, it helps you sleep at night for sure.
Yes. Especially wine.
Very true. Very true. It gets you out of the bed early in the morning, like you want to go and start and create whatever you're doing, and maybe a bit hungover if wine is your passion.
Really? I don't remember that. Oh, that's why I don't remember.
So let's touch on you brought up that it's going to be the 10th anniversary next year, and you were early in the game. So how have you seen the landscape of podcasting in particular change, not just from the wine standpoint, but just in general?
Well, quality in the beginning was a big issue for me. Being an audio engineer, I was going to make the best sounding podcast. The earlier podcasts I'd done were poorly recorded, sometimes just on laptops with laptop microphones and really no thought to editing whatsoever. And of course, that's what I'm all about, is to make sure I'm not out to make somebody say something they didn't say. I just don't want to have, there are people who talk like that. I do, in fact. So I think it's, in some ways it's gotten better. Some of them, though, sometimes the podcasts tend to be about the hosts and not about the guests. I don't understand that. Nobody cares about me. And it's not about me, it's about them. I with the videos, I keep myself out of them almost completely. And because I don't know if you've seen, we have about 160 videos on YouTube. And it's not about me, it's about them. I want their story. I'm just the guy who's facilitating it. So it's changed in that regard. I think people have a harder time finding their footing. And I think sometimes the ability to edit, to keep it concise. I don't mind a long, interview, but to be an editor, you have to have a tad of a cold heart. You have to be able to see what's important, what your listener wants to hear, versus what you might be enjoying. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You kind of touched on a couple of things there. One, like the personality of podcasts. I think if you're getting in it for yourself, that's probably the wrong motivation to begin with. And with editing, the same thing. It's not about you and what you want to listen to. It's, again, being that conduit and sharing and disseminating information and asking questions. Well, I guess you're in an interesting position in that you get to ask questions to a lot of people that, regular wine folks or what have you, or people just getting into wine don't necessarily have access to.
Right.
So then sort of bringing it down to their level too. So yeah, there's a lot involved in putting something together. Can you get into your editing process a little bit? That's something I'm sort of fascinated by now that you've opened that door.
Sure.
Yeah. How do you go about it? Just give me the details.
Sure. Well, there's two different ways. Normally, I've owned the studio, as I said, for 20 years, and I've had interns. So sometimes I'll have interns do the first blush, if you will, just take out any major gaps, any major stops if the batteries died, stuff like that. Every interview, it's got its own personality. They fascinate me. What I love about doing the editing is I get to relive them. And it's funny because especially in the beginning, when I would do some interviews and I'd walk away and I go, well, I'm never going to do another one like that. That was great. And then the same day I interview somebody and I walk away going, wow, that was even better. You sit back, you go through, you simply lay the tracks out. You have to deal with whatever, from a technical point of view. I've interviewed in caves, I've interviewed outdoors. I'm going to go back to your question about how it's changed, at least for me, the landscape of podcasting. In the beginning, if I could tell a little story.
Sure.
I was interviewing John Schaefer at Schaefer Vineyards, and John's just a wonderful guy. This was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And it was so funny because we're in his offices and we're set up, and he goes down the hall and he tells the secretaries and the assistants and everybody working, shh, no copies, no fax, shut the fax machine off, turn the phones off. He was so sweet. It was so cute. And, I didn't want to say anything to him. It's like, it's not a big deal. We're in a loud, reflective office. Excuse me. And now I don't care because I interview in a cave where I just did an interview in Chicago, a series of interviews with Australian winemakers in a warehouse. I can manipulate the audio. I can work with that. When we do events like Premier Napa Valley, I'm walking around with a portable unit. I'm sticking it in winemakers' faces. There's so much ambient noise. In fact, the cool thing about me doing that is I've got headphones on so I can hear them. If you were to take everybody out of that scene for a moment, it'd be hilarious because all we'd be doing is looking at each other and yelling at each other because it's so loud. So I don't know if I got away from your original question. My editing process. So yeah, just simply enough, I from a technical point of view, I take out the opposite person's microphone, so there's not too much echo. And I just try to, I'm going to give you another story. This is a great young man who now is a winemaker. At the time, he was a family member, just working his way up. And he had a tendency of answering the question on the third try. So he'd say, well, Brian, you have a beard. Why do you have a beard? And he'd go, well, I have a beard because the beard on my face is because I grew a beard because I'd like to be able to fill out my face. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And when I was editing, I didn't realize that. I thought, wow, it's geeky, but it's kind of interesting. And I did an interview a couple of weeks ago. I was interviewed, and I realized I did the same damn thing. I'm like, oh my God, is that an ADD thing or what? Everybody has their own different cadence, and you just have to play to it. You want to get rid of the ums and ahs, that kind of thing. That was a long answer.
No, it was a good answer, and it begs more questions, I think.
That's the way.
Yeah, so editing out ums and ahs and cleaning up audio, I guess I can go two ways. I'll start with this one. For someone who's just starting out, let's say they're just creating a podcast, they found wine, like, you know what, I want to do what Ray does and focus on this aspect of the industry and do a podcast. What advice do you have for them as far as editing and creating the final product that they publish on iTunes or whatever, Libsyn?
Well, first things I say, don't do a podcast because I'm already doing it. Sorry. It's interesting. Many years ago, a young woman come to me and asked me just that. She lived in San Francisco. She traveled to a couple of interviews with me. She wanted to kind of go from 0 to 100 miles an hour right away. And you can't do that. You have to understand audio first. You have to understand how audio works. You have to understand what it is to work with a microphone. You have to understand your acoustic setup. If you're doing a single microphone situation, you have to learn to ask the question and then wait, and then tell your interviewee to wait till the microphone's in front of them. Otherwise, you'll get half words, that kind of thing. There's a lot of simplistic things you have to be careful of. In my interviews, of course, I have microphones set up, and it's a fairly sizable setup. In fact, truthfully, it doesn't even need to be that big anymore, but people like it. They feel it's substantial. I think it appeals to their egos. But understanding audio is the first thing. Understanding, above all else, to don't talk when they're talking. Biggest mistake in the world. My former partner, I was in California on a trip doing some interviews, and we had a winemaker here in town in Milwaukee, and I asked him if he'd cover for me. He'd never done one. And he's a advertising agency owner, so he's been around this stuff. He gets it. And I came back to an interview where he's like, constantly commenting. And I told him, I said, listen to this. You can't do that. You have to listen to the person talking. You have to close your mouth because it's distracting. And it sounds like I'm being rude, but it's just simply how it is. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make. The worst thing in the world, it's like I always tease my sister and my niece when they talk to me, they tend to talk at the same time. I go, I know I have 2 ears, but they only work really on one signal. And you really have to let these people talk. And other than the fact that we tend these days to interrupt each other a lot, and it's rude. And if a winemaker has a message, you need to listen to it. It is that classic thing I learned when I was a journalist. Don't ever think of your next question while you're interviewing somebody. Or if you do think of that next question, make sure they don't know it. And I don't. Just like you're talking about with our interview here, the interview leads it. They'll tip me off to my next question. In fact, going back to doing podcasts for people, I can't speak for anybody else, but I don't do any research on most of the people I interview. I want them to tell the story. I want them to surprise me. Now, I'll find little nickel and dime things. Maybe they make it odd varietal. I always talk about things like Mourvedre, which you don't find very commonly in California or whatever it might be. So we'll let them lead that conversation, and tell me about it. And I'll bring that up. But more often than not, they'll tell me good stories on their own. They just like me. I enjoy telling my story. I love listening to them tell a story, and you have to be a good audience. I've seen people do interviews, and they're not being an audience. I do a radio show for NPR here locally in Milwaukee. The local station is WUWM, which is part of the university, and it's a wine segment. And the interviewers are fabulous there. They're really, really good at what they do because they get the questions out, but they are paying attention. And they're also thinking editing while they work, which is pretty fascinating. It's a little different than me. Because while I do a lot of interviews, they do a boatload of interviews. And all over the map. So again, that was a fairly broad answer for you.
Sure. No, again, a good answer nonetheless. I think one of the things you touched on in there was just that lost art of conversation and listening is so important. I think we're all too often eager to interject and say like, oh, me, look what I know. When, in reality, if you're doing a podcast or something like this, where I'm trying to interview a bunch of people, it's about just trying to extract as much as you can in those 30-minute, 60-minute segments that you do get to sit down with people.
If I could interject, there's a great bit about that in the movie Pulp Fiction, if you saw the movie, where John Travolta is asked by Uma Thurman. She asks him a series of questions on a videotape and said, do you answer a question immediately or interrupt somebody, or do you actually think about it before you answer it? I'm phrasing it very poorly, but it stuck in my head when she did that, and I'm kind of geeky that way, I guess. But it's made me be a little more focused when I talk to people. And it's difficult when people talk at the same time. There you go.
Totally. I think you get stuck, and especially wine in particular, something you're excited about, and you're like, oh, it's whatever neat thing the winemaker tells you, but you just have to kind of wait and be patient. And a lot of times there's like gold in those moments where you don't interject, even if you just like kind of let them finish, because maybe they're not done. I was thinking sometimes there's always like another thought in there, and humans after all need some time to process. So some of the best interviews I've had is just like I've sat back and maybe I've asked 1, 2, 3 questions, and then all of a sudden the floodgates open and you're like, oh my gosh, I just got all this great tape and all this knowledge from one question.
Yeah, I had a guy like that once here, actually at the studio. I point to my booth, which you can't see. First 15 minutes of the interview, I just wasn't there with him. We weren't connecting, and I didn't know how, and I didn't know why. And then all of a sudden, I think I brought up some technical questions. I was a little curious about how he laid out his vineyards or something like that. And the floodgates opened, and it was great. We became friends. Sometimes it's hard. Some people don't always want to talk about themselves. You have to find something that lets them know you really do care.
That's a great segue into my next question, which would be, how do you find that common ground? So that was a perfect story. Maybe you can answer with another one. When you're not connecting with somebody, or like you said, you don't do research, so you don't necessarily have a template or things you're working off of. How do you make that connection and create a really great interview?
That's a really, really good question. And here's the big difference is you have to be a people person. Brian, talking to you, you strike me as being a people person. You're very easy to talk to. You're very pleasant. And clearly you have a sense of humor. You have to have those things. It's not a matter of being charming. And the worst thing you want to do is walk in going, hey, Mr. Winemaker, I'm here to talk to you, and I'm really interested. Oh, look, shiny object. It's got to be sincere. And because I love wine, I am. In fact, that's, like you said before, that's a bit of a detriment, because you do want to go down a little path occasionally, which maybe your listeners aren't going to be so interested in. But you have to be a real person. You have to be sincere. And humor's the biggest thing, because while I'm setting up, it takes me about 15 minutes to get set up, especially with the video, and I have to set them up and focus and play. And I'm trying to make jokes, and I'm trying to get them comfortable. And you're not going to win with everybody, but most people you do. And people seem to be okay with me, and I like people sincerely. If you don't like people, don't do this, because you'll get killed. People, they smell fear. They smell, any of that anxiety. You have to be comfortable. I remember when I interviewed Mike Gergich, I was a little on the nervous side.
Sure.
And Mike talks very slow. This was a few years ago. So you have to be patient and let him finish. And he was funny as heck. He just cracked me up. And there's a few people that are like that. You have to connect with them first. Once you connect with them, I guess it's like they say in sales, you have to sell yourself. Well, that's sort of what I have to do when I meet them. And there are people, while I say I don't do research, it's not 100% true. I'll at least glance at websites or read a press release, and I've probably tried their wine, or I'll get to try it at whenever we meet. It's just funny. All of a sudden, 20 faces just ran through my head. I mean, certain people, I remember meeting this one guy, and sadly, he's no longer with us. He was a wonderful winemaker from Coombsville. I saw this guy, and he was an Italian guy, and he had this most wonderful face, incredible blue eyes. And I thought, I want to meet this guy because he looks like he's fun. And I did meet him, and he was fun, and his winemaker was even wackier than him. And we just had a blast, and he invited me to his house to do an interview with him, and I met his family. And, I walked away from that interview going, I feel like I'm better for having spent time. And the guy was a former firefighter, first ex-fireman I ever met that became a winemaker. Sadly, he passed away. Broke my heart. I was such a shock when I found out. It was only a couple of years ago. But it was that connecting with the guy. Maybe it's just you find that one thing,
Yeah, it's all about finding common ground. And it's really important, especially whether it be wine or, I think just, to go completely off topic, just connecting with people in general. I think when I'm at the store doing the retail job that I do in wine, yeah, it isn't about the wine. And luckily enough, I work at a place where there's no commission. So I'm not focused on like trying to get them to the rack and make a big sale.
Nice.
At the end of the day, I can just sit there and find out, what are they having for dinner? Who's coming over? And I end up asking lots of questions. And then you try and find the perfect wine. And, maybe 1 out of 10 times somebody comes back and says, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And you're like, okay, great. Like it makes it totally worthwhile. But again, it's about connecting and being a human, which is sort of a lost art.
That's really satisfying for you, I got to believe. Well, I will tell you a short story. Our very first interview was Jeff Bunshoe from Gunlock Bunshoe. Happened to be in Milwaukee. We went to his wine dinner and talked to him afterwards. He's, if you ever met him or if you're familiar with him, very young guy, looks like a surfer dude. And he's so entertaining and so funny and self-deprecating. And I said, we'd like to have you come by the studio since you're in town. And he goes, well, how long do you need? And I go, well, what can you give me? He goes, well, I'll give you half hour. So he comes to the studio, and maybe you can see it in the background, but I have a lot of Beatles memorabilia here in the studio. I'm a bit of a geek in that regard. And he came in and he just was knocked over by it. He really got a kick out of it. We talked about that for a long time, got him in the booth, and an hour and a half later, he was done. I mean, he just wanted to go on because he was so entertaining to listen to. That was back in 2008, very early in 2008. And I just saw Jeff back in February at Sonoma. It was his dad was being inducted at, I believe it was the Sonoma Icon Award. And I walk up and I go, Jeff, I'm not sure if you remember me. Of course I do, Ray. He immediately knew who I was. One funny thing I will tell you though is he said, after the interview, he said, when you're in Sonoma, next time you come, go to the tasting room and have them call me up at the house and just say, Ray from Abbey Road West is here. Well, a year and a half ago after that, I did go there and I tried that. And Jeff came down from the house in about 2 seconds. These are who these people are. They lead fun, enjoyable lives. I mean, it's hard work to be sure, especially when you're traveling and you're away from your family so often and you're selling wine at one bottle at a time. But so I went on a story, but Jeff's a wonderful guy. It was really great seeing him again.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. And I think it lends itself to this idea that wine is really about community and the experience and sharing wine and just, whether it be conversation over dinner or something, wine's that glue that holds us all together. And yeah, I think going to the Domain and having wine, I don't know if there's a better experience than that. And when you come and you walk away, it's really cool. And I think nowadays too, we look at winemakers as like these rock stars and gods, if you will, because I can't tell you how many times people come in and they ask for a particular wine when they went to a region and they're like, oh, I went to, Chateau Smith and, Ray Smith walked down and he was there. And I was like, oh my gosh, like you're here, you make the wine. Holy cow. Do you guys have any of that stuff? And it's those things I think people forget because wine can be so transformative that, there's like a human behind it and actually several hundred humans usually behind it. So it usually appears to you as like this magical thing in a bottle.
Yeah.
And then when you find out the stories and things behind it, it just really becomes even more powerful.
It is. You're right. They're humans. They're real. And I think, people don't always, are they in a burrow somewhere mixing strange chemicals? It's a real honor to meet them. And they're really giving of themselves, which fascinates me because that takes a lot of energy. It really does. So, yeah, I mean, I have done numerous interviews with winemakers. I'm not going to say who they are, but have invited me to their house for dinner on the first meeting. And I'm like, really? I don't know if I trust me like that. It's really pretty cool. So,
staying in line with interviews and some of your favorites, you've highlighted some great stories already. Are there any interviews you can remember of people who maybe really surprised you?
In a good way?
Yeah, let's stay positive.
Yeah, let's keep to that. That's a good idea. I'll tell you, one of my favorites was Carissa Mondavi, who's Robert Mondavi's granddaughter. She was so down to earth, so real, so much fun. we interviewed before they built the Continuum Estate up on Pritchard Hill several years ago. And I don't know if she was the most comfortable person in the world being interviewed, but she said afterwards, in fact, actually she did say that, and she said that I made her feel comfortable. And that was such a great compliment. But more importantly, she was so sweet. And she has her grandfather's eyes. It was a little odd at first. You're kind of like, wow, you're a beautiful woman, yet you look like your grandfather. It's a very sideways kind of comment. And then we interviewed her again back in February this year, which was such a pleasure to talk to her again, and how that connection never went away. Sadly, she's gotten married since, so she broke my heart, but yeah, so be it. But she was one that her access, her pleasantness was so nice. There's a winemaker named Jean Hofigler. It's actually pronounced Jean Fier, but he always laughs at me when I say it in his proper Swiss. Known him for many years, and he surprised me because he was so forthcoming with incredible amounts of information. And while he's talking to me, it occurs to me, geez, how many times a day did he do this and it still feels fresh? That's pretty impressive. Not everybody likes to talk about what they do. I don't always like to talk about audio with people who don't know about audio. I'll talk wine till your ears fall off. But, audio is kind of a very, small thing. Few people understand it. So, and those are a couple of people that come to mind. Again, Mike Ergich was so fun because he was hitting on my girlfriend at the end of the interview. Interviewed Mike's daughter, who was fantastic to talk to. Just a lot of information, very, very smart woman. And of course, taking over with her cousin in the winery there. So, there's one particular guy, Eloise Legator, who is Italian, but speaks with an Austrian accent, which is a little hard to get past. He's been here a couple of times, and I've also met his son and interviewed his son. So, I mean, everybody's different. It's snowflakes, in the nicest way, not the way people are talking today. Yeah.
So you're in Milwaukee, correct, or nearby?
Look behind me, Milwaukee's right there.
Okay, so not exactly the epicenter of wine culture.
What? What?
Maybe I'm wrong.
I wanted to come here.
So, and it's amazing that you get a lot of these people in studio. How do you get people to come to Milwaukee? Is it through industry events? How do you end up booking some of this amazing talent and minds in the wine industry to come over and do an interview?
Well, Brian, let me tell you, it's just my personality, my charm, and my skill. You know what it is? It's distributors who are a big help to me, which is a hard connection to keep because they're such busy people. I'm sure you deal with a lot of those folks. When there's a wine dinner in town, we always try to find out who might be coming. And sometimes it's hard to get them here because they're making visits to restaurants, to beverage stores, that kind of thing. It's just building a network, I guess I'd say. It's fun when you get the European ones because obviously right now I'm not able to travel as much as I'd like to those countries and visit those folks. We've got Italian, French, Australian winemakers, and they're more than willing if they can squeeze it in. We always try and tell them, well, we only need a half hour. They'll always stay as long as they can, which is great. This past Monday, I was just down in Chicago for the Australia Close-Up event, which was about 25, give or take, winemakers from Australia. And this is simply a PR firm, and those are my biggest connections. PR people, cannot say enough about them. This is a woman who heads up the PR group from Australia. She set me up with originally 8 interviews. My eyes were kind of bulging when she first said that. It's like 8 interviews in about 6 hours. I could lose my mind. And they were very good and very easy. We only did 5 because a couple people didn't make it to the event. But it was right in downtown. Just hopped on the train, got down there, lugged my junk, my gear, and set it up. And she was fabulous in keeping it going. And all of them were fun. There were a couple of tougher interviews than others, but overall they were very, very good. The wines were amazing. And Australia was kind of funny because they're admitting, hey, we messed up. We messed up. Well, we're not going to do that again. And I thought that was so refreshing to hear that, because it's kind of like you hope your politicians would do that one day. So I deal with a company out of Los Angeles, Catherine Jarvis PR. She's phenomenal. As how much help she is, I can't even begin to say. And it's not just to her, it's her staff. JMPR out of San Francisco, Julianne Kovner out of Napa, all kinds of these folks that you develop relationships with, but it's real. It's not just, there are some, I will get negative for a moment. I get a lot of stuff in my email, and one person wrote me a note saying, hey, there's this great winery in Texas. They do this, they do that, they do this, blah, 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 blah. It's a general release. So I write her back and I said, well, I'd like to do an interview with them. I'd probably just do a phone patch interview. But yeah, that'd be nice if we could do that. So she writes me back and gives me their name and address. And I'm like, okay. Yeah, well, I guess there's no interview there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the job. These people most PR people go way above and beyond. And occasionally you run into a few who are just simply there to do nothing. And luckily enough, I don't deal with those folks. The ones I deal with are just incredible. So again, to answer your question, it's not as if they come to Milwaukee. We just happen to nab them when they're here. We have a giant trap outside of cheese, and there's some really good cheese.
Yeah, the Cheese Castle, right, on your way in?
Yeah, you know that. You've been here.
Oh, yeah. I'm down the road in Chicago. So.
Oh, you're in Chicago. Oh,
yeah.
I didn't realize that. Oh, we could have almost done this in person.
Yeah, we could have.
Actually, I'll be down there again Monday. There's a dinner I'm supposed to be going to with a French winemaker.
Great.
Well, I love Chicago, and I go down pretty regularly to a lot of events. The Portugal thing usually comes through once a year, and I absolutely am crazy about Portuguese wines. And they're always a lot of fun to talk to. I just did one there last year, if I remember correctly.
Excellent. So speaking of wines you're digging, you dig Portuguese wine. What wine, beer, spirits, regions, what have you? What's caught your eye lately?
I like all kinds of wine. I mean, it's one thing I've learned is to try everything I can. Biggest mistake I made when I was younger was not. Lately, I've been going crazy about Sauvignon Blanc, and I don't know why, but I'm sure enjoying it again. It's like rediscovering it. Always loved Riesling. I'm a red guy, for sure. I'm a Cabernet guy. I love Cabernet. Lately, I try so much. Part of it, too, I guess, is trying to find some great Pinot. I love Oregon Pinot. And while I am not that Pinot guy by any stretch, I haven't gotten there yet. I'm thinking one day it'll happen, but it hasn't happened because I'm still too rooted in Cabernet. And California Cabernet, again, specifically. But boy, some of this Australian Cabernet I tried the other day surprised the heck out of me. It was really good. It was very good. And they had a couple of varietals I wasn't familiar with, and I'm sorry I can't name them right now because I don't have notes in front of me. But they were making some really good wines. I was very impressed. Good values, too, I might add, which is something all people are looking for. So, yeah, I think those are the areas. And, I think every wine lover, and you'll probably say the same thing, is you float, you have your base, whatever your favorite might be, like a lot of people tend to be a Pinot or Cab or whatever. I think the area I've neglected the most is Zinfandel. I used to drink it a lot in the past, and I've been touching on it again, and again, starting to rediscover it because it's so diverse. It's wildly diverse. I think all wines have that, but I think Zin seems to be the most. It's part of it as a wine lover, just being patient with yourself to try the wines and not just, well, I don't like that, so I'm not going to drink it again,
Yeah, revisiting things is always fascinating, especially as you get deeper and deeper and coming back. Like Zinfandel is one of those grapes I love. And so you're talking about Zinfandel, and I was like, oh man, I could just spend 20 minutes telling you all about all the different kinds of Zinfandel I love and, different producers doing different things. But rather than do that, I'll just send you a couple of my favorite bottles and you can dive in that way. And then we can have a round table part 2. Where
that'd be awesome. I would love that. Well, and one last thing too is, of course, rosé. I'm a nut for rosé, and because again, like we were just saying, the difference with rosé is that it's from everywhere. I mean, it's from everybody makes it, but you're going to have Grenache, you're going to have Pinot Noir, you're going to have, you know, Cabernet, all kinds of stuff. It's the game changer. There is no other wine like it in that regard. So many different styles. You have the French style, the American style. A good friend of mine, and one of your questions, if I could answer without your asking it, asked who's my biggest influence in wine, and easily I'll say my very good friend Henrik Poulsen makes a wine called Release, and Henrik's he's a remarkable man in terms of he's got his palate makes me crazy. I stay with him when I'm in Napa when we do tastings, and these are all very casual tastings. I just sit and listen to him. He's because he's a winemaker. He has a winemaker's palate, but he has the knowledge of a sommelier. He can narrow something down blind in seconds. Knocks my socks off. He's from Copenhagen. He's lived in the States and made wine for a long time. He's made wine for Alpha Omega, for Newton, for a number of places. And he has his own label called Release. And what he just did was he released his first rosé. He's done, I think he's done 4 vintages, 7 vintages, I believe now. But his rosé is a blend of vintages. I believe, and I might be wrong. I think it's 4 or 5 vintages in that rosé. I don't know if too many people have ever done that. And it's not inexpensive.
Sure.
And, you know, it's just, I like his thinking, how clever it is. It's not about just the marketing thing. It's being able to say, this is something you will truly enjoy. And he makes fantastic wines. So rosé is something I didn't want to let that slip because it's really important these days. Because I think rosé is, for some people who got tired of wine for a while, to reintroducing them to it.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of those things sitting on the retail side, I think, and now the way our shop is set up, it's sort of like at the front, you know, on display. And I think so many people cringe and are thinking like, ooh, White Zinfandel, like from the 80s. And they're like, oh, is it sweet? And you're like, no. And they're like, are you sure? You know, they have that fear. And then you have to just slowly like walk them through it. But again, it's such a great wine. It's not just a summer wine. I think it's 24/7, 365.
Agreed.
It's so approachable. It's so food friendly. It's so versatile. The vast majority are a little bit lower alcohol, so you can have more of it, which is great. They're just, my favorites are the ones that are like fresh and approachable, and you're gulping them down, and then all of a sudden you have that aha moment where you're like, wow, something else is going on here, something a bit more complicated. And those are my favorites. And there's plenty of producers, I think, who are doing great rosés, and they run the whole gambit of price, right? You know, you can find a fine bottle under 10, and you can get some really interesting stuff at even just above $20 a bottle.
Oh yeah, they're still approachable. That's the best.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place as any to wrap it up. Before I let you go, what is the best way people can get in touch with you and find you on the internet?
So weird. I've asked that question 500,000 times. Best way to find me, of course, is at our website, which is lifebetweenthevines.com. Of course, we have a Facebook page, which is just type in Life Between the Vines. And of course, we do Twitter. And of course, we have a YouTube page, which I think is a lot of fun to go through, because you get to see really who these people are. As a quick aside, we did a piece for Auction Napa Valley last year. It was called 5 Words. One of my favorite videos. It's very brief. It's only about a minute long. And it started off by Aaron Pott, who's such a silly, silly man. And I watch stuff like that, and again, you relive it, and you're just like, wow. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, that's how you can find me.
I hope you found Ray's interview as insightful as I did. Please check him out at Life Between the Vines. You can find links to all of Ray's stuff on theroadtowinexpert.com. Wait. Before you skip to the next episode, can I have 2 minutes of your time? Really quick. Thank you so much. Here's the deal. I want to get the Road to Wine Expert to 1,000 episodes before the end of season 1, which is just a few weeks away. Because when we get to 1,000 episodes, I'm going to give away $1,000 of my favorite books. Yes, all the books from the podcast guests here, like the Scratch and Sniff Guide to Wine, the Unfiltered Guide to Working in Wine, Cork Dork, the list goes on and on and on. The Judgment in Paris, and even Elizabeth Schneider's new book. So here's the deal. Help us get to 1,000 by sharing an episode, your favorite episode, with a friend who you know will love it. Tag your friends on Instagram, share our posts, share that you're listening in stories, and just spread the word. Because the quicker we get to the 1,000, the quicker I will give all this cool stuff away. And here's the deal. I paid for it out of my own pocket. No more sponsorship. We're going to do this thing ourselves. So show us your love, show us your support, and I'll also throw in some cool Road to Wine Expert swag. So get us to 1,000, then the giveaway happens, and I'll make all of your wine expert dreams come true. Until next time, I'm Brian McCann, and thanks for listening.